Hi there, welcome to the archives. In this episode, I'm doing an audio recording titled Simon Says, Activate the Anti-Black White Supremacist in You. It was originally posted on my website on October the 13th of 2020. You can find the blog at www.thearchives.com under the blogs. I want to issue a content and trigger warning for violence against women and girls, for domestic violence, emotional, psychological, physical, and sexual abuse, as well as anti-Blackness, white supremacy, acquired brain injury, and traumatic brain injury. Please proceed with care. Take breaks as you need to. Disengage if you have to. It is a difficult topic. This section explores internalized anti-Blackness in the Black community, specifically within Black men, and how their quest for power and control has resulted in similar harms against Black women that have been enacted against us by white people. I first turned to a childhood game that many of us know, and an analogy that others have used to thematize white supremacy and its lasting legacies. And this is a very basic Simon Says. Thanks for stopping by. In the game of Simon Says, we know that there can only be one Simon. Otherwise, confusion ensues. We would not know who to take commands from, or where to set our attention in order to successfully win the game and not lose. With this in mind, in order to gain some sense of control, we seek out more power in order to not be the ones taking orders. To gain the position of Simon is to be in competition with one another. In this regard, we all grapple with our yearnings to be Simon in our individual lives. What ends up happening is that the one, Simon, becomes many, Simons, as in plural. In an attempt to be one, united, or rather, number one, Simon, we end up with different versions and variations of what was once one. For example, feminism becomes feminisms, and this is not an entirely bad thing. I've written about this in previous posts and more to come. This is a multiplicity we arrive at when we are moved by power to be Simon, the one with power and control. It is a huge privilege to be Simon. Those standing in as Simon place themselves front and center. They render all others to the margins and dictate the terms of the game. The position comes with its perks and luxuries. You do what you want and call the shots. You get to trick people into doing what you would rather not do yourself, at least not all the way. For instance, they get to be your slave, they do your dirty work, they serve for you. And I use the word slave here for convenience and lack of a better word. Wikipedia states, it is the ability to distinguish between genuine and fake commands rather than physical ability that usually matters in the game. In this regard, getting tricked, humiliated, and taken out of the game in front of others is shameful. Further driving competition in order to not be shamed. In this way, the game is made joyful the more you get to deceive and humiliate others. There's a sense of ecstasy in eliminating every player until it is you alone left standing. No one can hold you accountable, speak up against you, or even talk up for that matter. Complete silence is required in order to stay in the game. Docility is promoted as speaking out is forbidden and subsequently a punishable offense. To leverage power and maintain control is the ultimate goal. With enough power, you get to be Simon, but for always. With enough control, you can stay Simon and forever. There's a sense of freedom associated with being Simon that we all know and want. Who wants to give that up? Hint, definitely not white men and women. At the end of the game, only one person feels good about winning. And to be clear, that is Simon. Everyone else who loses the game pretends to be happy for Simon and vows that next time they too will win and get to be Simon. For some of these reasons, the objective of Simon Says is to be Simon and number one, which is very different from being one. Jimi Hendrix is said to have stated, "When the power of love overcomes the love of power, then the world will know peace." Cliché, but true. When we are more interested in being number one than in being one, what we are dealing with is shame because we will do shameful things in order to assert ourselves as number one and Simon. We all know who the original Simon is. It's white men. They have historically and to date done horrendous and vile things in order to maintain the power and control necessary to remain Simon and number one. As was discussed in a previous episode and blog titled Parable of the Talents Unraveling White Male Power. But if we look around, there seem to be various iterations of Simon everywhere. White women, for instance, fight to be Simon over children, over Black and other racialized communities of color, as was discussed in a previous episode and blog titled Nice Nasty White Feminists and Shame. But this race to be Simon is also the case for racialized communities globally, who vie and compete with one another to be Simon, or at the very least, the Simon in their communities. A vast majority of the globe is anti-Black, is anti-Indigenous, and white supremacist. This includes Black, Indigenous, and non-Black racialized people. Frantz Fanon in 1952 called this phenomenon Black skin, white masks, where Black people adopt white ways and perform whiteness sometimes more stringently than white people themselves. You can think of conservatives, for instance, or Christians. A whole lot of isms and isations come into play in order to shape how non-white people come to internalize white supremacist ideals. White supremacy understood here as a myth of white superiority and inferiority of all others. Because of how anti-Blackness functions in tandem with power, capitalism, patriarchy, colonialism, neocolonialism, imperialism, hegemony, assimilation, socialization, modernization, and globalization, and so much more. Black and other racialized non-Black people globally have adopted similar anti-Black impressions as Simon, resulting in lateral violence against one another that is tied to power and various shames that mirror white supremacy and white people. Colonial conquest, European superpowers, missionaries, and the role of English. These processes have been powerful tools in indoctrinating Black and brown people into believing that white people are indeed better, more worthy, respectable, and more deserving. Something scholars and activists like Frantz Fanon have written about extensively. Similar to white men, heterosexual, cis-identified Black men have been given immense power over women within the Black community. Patriarchy in the church and society at large has fed Black men the message that they are to dominate women and children. And for the most part, they do, and violently. Black men will call anti-Black white supremacist men and women out on their anti-Blackness. But many refuse to assess how they too have internalized anti-Blackness, and that they are often anti-Black women, which Moya Bailey defines as misogynoir. Globally, Black children bear witness to their mothers being beaten by their intimate partners. According to violence against women researchers Diane Lalonde, Jasmine Tabibi, and Linda Baker, this is from 2020, 10% of Canadian adults have shared that as a child, they had witnessed violence by a parent or guardian at the hands of another adult in their home. The researchers add, this is a quote, 45% of all substantiated investigations of child maltreatment in Ontario, Canada for 2018 involved exposure to intimate partner violence, an estimated of 17,051 of investigated cases. Intimate partner violence takes a toll on children and women alike. And Black women can no longer afford to save broken Black men. Nigerian American writer Ara Iliowabujikuchu, 2019, and I apologize for pronouncing that name wrong, points to the devastating reality of intimate partner violence faced by Black men. Ara shares staggering statistics of how in America, 9 out of 10 Black women respondents were killed by Black men, and that 91% of all Black female homicides were by Black men that the victims knew. In comparison to their white counterparts, Ara identifies that Black women are killed by Black men at a rate 3 times higher than white women, and that Black female homicide victims are most often killed during the course of an argument or disagreement. I want to pause here and add and insert a section that's not in the blog. It comes from Mark Lamont Hill. I was recently reading We Still Here, Pandemic, Policing, Protests, and Possibility, which was published by Haymarket Books in 2020. In it, Mark speaks to violence against women within the Black community, and he shares how Black women, we have to remember that while all Black folks, Black men and Black women alike, face subjugation and threat by the police, that Black women also experience things at a much higher rate than Black men. And in these cases, most Black men are not even aware of it. So, for example, Mark Lamont Hill shares how the logic, and this is a quote, the logic of patriarchy makes the male experience not only the dominant experience, but the singular one. And this can be found on page 94 of their book. Hill goes on to say, without question, this is a quote, without question, Black, cis, hetero men are victims of a racist and violent system. But this fact does not nullify the reality that we, as in Black men, are also tremendous perpetrators of harm within our community. For example, many interactions between police and Black men stem from domestic violence complaints. While we, again the we here is Black men, while we may have legitimate critiques of the particular ways that police intervene, we cannot ignore the equally critical crisis of Black male violence against women, end quote. And again, this is Mark Lamont Hill. You can find that on page 95. I want to share one more quote from Mark Lamont Hill. He says, we cannot critique state violence against Black trans women without acknowledging that they are far more likely to be killed by a Black man than by the police. And this is on page 95 of We Still Here. I'm going to return to the blog now. It is not only Black African American women who grapple with these horrific statistics, but women globally, Black women globally. For Nicole Fisher in 2019, they shared that intimate partner violence has to be framed in the context of a global public health epidemic. So again, this is Nicole Fisher writing in 2019, stating that intimate partner violence has to be framed in the context of a global public health epidemic. Fisher assesses that the minimization and negation of violence against women is a major contributing factor to why this epidemic goes untreated. In stating that intimate partner violence is a global epidemic, Fisher is speaking to the normalization of violence against women rooted in white supremacy that gets enacted through patriarchal structures, such as the church and in everyday households. Here, I want to turn to a 2018 Nollywood film that was on Netflix called 7.5 Dates. It was directed by Biodun Stephen, produced by Toyin Amaka, and written by Joy Isibewaji. Again, I apologize if I'm pronouncing these names incorrectly. So in the movie 7.5 Dates, the main character, Bisola, takes an offer from her traditional Nigerian father to date 10 men of his choosing after her younger sister gets engaged before she does. So within the African context, this is seen as like horrendous, right? As the eldest, you should be the first to get married, you should be the first to have children. That's just how it works, apparently, in African households. Bisola is described as a young, single Yoruba businesswoman living in Lagos. She owns her own store and goes against the grain by investing more in her career than in dating, marriage, or raising a family. Again, this is seen by a lot of Africans as an abomination. One particular date she goes on illustrates what Black women are up against when it comes to the internalization of white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and misogynoir in Black men. My mom left my dad when I was 18, and I was very ashamed of that, her date begins. After inquiring, Bisola is told some of the reasons why. Well, he used to beat her sometimes. Hit her head against the wall and grabbed her by the neck, he clarifies. When Bisola suggests that these are good reasons for why a Black woman should leave her abusive husband, he is puzzled and questioned and confused by her reaction. Is that enough reason for you to leave your husband? He asks. According to researchers Robert Nonomura, Linda Baker, and Diane Lalonde, blows to the head during intimate partner violence are nothing to take lightly. Nonomura, Baker, and Lalonde touch on some of the unseen effects that intimate partner violence, also known as IPV, can have on women, including neurological brain injuries. The three address the gap in research on traumatic brain injuries, known as TBI, as it applies to intimate partner violence. According to the researchers, in Canada, Statistics Canada has reported that 1/3 of all police-reported violence involved intimate partners, which is roughly 95,705, and that nearly 8 out of 10 of these victims were women. So what Mark Lamont Hill was talking about in their book as well too. They add that 60 to 90% of women who experience IPV also receive blows to the head or neck that leave lasting damage. While TBI is often contextualized in relation to athletes and accident victims, Nonomura, Baker, and Lalonde ask that we not forget the seriousness of traumatic brain injuries as it pertains to intimate partner violence. And I want to highlight that June in Canada is Brain Injury Awareness Month. We don't often talk about brain injuries at all, let alone in the context of domestic violence. Just as gendered relations assume whiteness as the norm, here, gendered relations assume men and patriarchs as the norm. And I take this from Sarah Ahmed's work from 2005. Returning back to the Netflix movie, Bisola is adamant that his mother, her date's mother, left her marriage in order to save her own life, speaking to the high mortality rate of Black women killed by intimate partner violence. Her date is relentless and continues, save her life from what? Mere punches on the head? For better or for worse, remember? He is referencing traditional marriage vows where husband and wife proclaim to take each other for better or for worse, until death do us part. The harsh reality is that for Black women, marriages do tend to end in death, and at a much higher rate than their white women. In the US, 91% of Black women die at the hands of men they knew intimately. And again, I take this from Ara's work in 2019. You can also look at Berg and Northwest Network of bisexual, trans, lesbian, and gay survivors of abuse. Their work in Creative Interventions, which was published in 2012. These reasons are precisely why his mother chose to walk away. After leaving her marriage, his mother became a very successful businesswoman, what he described as a failure. So she leaves here. So she leaves her abusive husband, is resilient, goes on to rebuild her life, becomes a successful businesswoman, and within the African context, based on European teachings, church teachings at that, her son describes his mother's accomplishments as a failure. He shames his mother for failing to perform normative societal gendered scripts. He says, a woman is defined by her marital status. She couldn't keep a home, Women who die in marriage for the love of their husband and children, they are true martyrs, he says. I mean, it's the West that has corrupted our women. I need a real woman, he says. A Proverbs 31 kind of woman, he concludes. Don't look over here. As most patriarchal traditional African men do, her date blames the West. Specifically, he blames Western feminists to be exact. He recites Christian scripture in defense of his father's domestic violence, suggesting that he too is looking for a virtuous woman, what she identifies as someone to be his punching bag. End quote. These same men ignore the fact that the very Bible and Christian traditions they use in their arguments, along with their Western attire, their Western ways of governing, their Western education systems, etc., these were all imported into Africa by Europeans. I spoke about this in a previous blog. In this way, victims of domestic violence are shamed through what Brene Brown identifies as the "who do you think you are" script, where the onus and blame is taken away from men and shifted onto women who should have, and I quote, known their place, right? This is what we tell women: you deserve the violence because you were trying to be a man. You didn't know your place. You deserved it. There's a lot of victim blaming that goes on in these scripts. Where we have conflict, we will find shame present. Shame incites conflict and is also a byproduct of it. This is because for most, men and their male fragility especially, shame is so unbearable that they punish others for how they strike shame in them. As Sarah Ahmed insisted, and this is a quote, shame implies that some quality of self has been brought into question, end quote, and this is on page 105. Because of misogynoir, most black men, we're going to have I know already, not all crew is going to come. Not all black men are like this. Not all white women are like this. Not all white men are like, we get it. We know that. Okay? But for the vast majority of black men, they cannot stand to be questioned by black women. They become particularly volatile when the badness of an action is transferred to them, such that they feel themselves to be bad and to be found out as bad by others. And this is a direct quote from Sarah Ahmed's work in 2015. You can find that on page 105. There's a difference between guilt and shame. With guilt, we perceive ourselves as having done wrong. With shame, we perceive ourselves as wrong, as bad. Jennifer Beidel talks about this, Sarah Ahmed talks about this, Bisson Baker talks about this, Brene Brown talks about this. Others have talked extensively about the difference between shame and guilt. This way of constructing identity through the lens of shame is harmful, if not destructive. Shaming someone and pinning them as bad and wrong is a wounding to the ego so great that doing so is signified as an invitation to violence. Drawing from Margaret Atwood, Canadian writer Margaret Atwood, Keely Wise, 2019, writes, We have been taught that if a woman laughs at a man, she would be killed for it. And I read earlier, either today or yesterday, someone said, and I don't remember where this quote comes from, but they said, men are afraid to be laughed by women. Women are afraid to be killed by men. So again, this touches on male fragility, this idea that being shamed, a woman shaming a man is invitation for violence, right? Men are afraid to be laughed by women, their ego bruised. Shame is so awful to men, and yet women, we are terrified that we will be killed by men. Keely goes on and points to incel terrorism as an example of male fragility tied to sexual and social rejection of men by women. So again, the example of incel terrorism, where men who are either virgins or celibate or not having sex, they take their rage out on women because how dare women not have sex with them, resulting in murder of women. You can think of the Atlanta massacre recently, where Asian women were killed by this white man who police officers said was having a bad day. It's not a bad day when it's rooted in these very systemic and structural issues that continue to appear over and over through history for hundreds and thousands of women. It's not a bad day when it's more than just one individual case. So this male fragility tied to sexual and social rejection has to do with power, and it also relates to shame. Shame is a powerful emotion. We underestimate shame. So many of us underestimate shame because we don't want to talk about shame. We're afraid of being seen as shameful. We just don't want anything to do with shame. But shame is such a powerful emotion. It is like fear. It is like trauma. Brene Brown identifies shame as a master emotion. Unless one has built what Brene Brown calls shame resilience, shame will do as shame does. It will move us, sometimes unconsciously, haphazardly. Shame produces secondary emotions such as anger, rage, anxiety, and fear. And this is from Brene Brown's work, 2006. You can find that on page 45. In this regard, shame is not only an emotion but an affect. Affect is when we are moved, right? You can feel an emotion and not necessarily express it, but when you are moved to like punch somebody, to be violent, to get up, to go for a walk, you're affected. That is what affect theorists call affect. I'm gonna get into the definition of affect in episodes to come. There is no feeling more painful, Jennifer Beidel says of shame. Again, shame is painful, it is physically painful, it is emotionally painful. In shame, we are reduced to an object, we are reduced to the feminine, we are reduced to the abject and disgust. And this is a quote from Jennifer Beidel. Their work in 1997 on page 227. You can also look at Basin Baker via Kristeva and Haberstam's work as well too. They all speak to this topic of pain as shameful. No, shame as painful. Furthermore, Mons Baker draws our attention to Eve Sedgwick's work on shame, which identifies shame's relationality as bound with the threat of social exclusion. So Brene Brown has talked about this extensively, right? The idea that we are all hardwired for connection and belonging. So shame threatens this, with the idea being that in shame, we are going to get outcasted, we are going to get disconnected from, people are going to throw us away, and it poses such a threat to social exclusion. This is why so many of us will perform and wear masks and avoid being vulnerable, because we are afraid that when people see who we really are, they will be ashamed of us and throw us out. And the notion of social exclusion is so painful, is so threatening, that we would rather not show people who we are. As Brene Brown iterates, humans are hardwired for social connection and belonging. Shame threatens this bond. Men know and feel this, which is why shame is particularly threatening to them, especially so when society tells them that only women are to be relegated as objects and that men are to be strong and powerful, not emotional or easily taken over by their emotions. In this way, we underestimate what shame does to our human faculties, let alone toxic masculinity. Black men are raised to believe that everyone is above them, except for Black women. All men, for that matter, are taught that Black women are beneath them. For this reason, men will lash out violently when they are shamed by Black women. How dare you? Who do you think you are? Says the bruised male ego, brought to shame by Black women. These emotional outbursts are seen as justified and normal. And women are gaslighted. We are told that we are emotional and sensitive creatures. Like white men, most hyper-masculine and toxic black men do not identify with emotion. They're not emotional. Nope, we're not emotional. We don't do emotionals. We're not sensitive. And yet anger is an emotion. You're feeling shame. That is an emotion. Rage is an emotion. So in turn, Black men feel more shame for their response to having been moved by shame, which leads to more micro and macro aggressions against Black women, or just outright violence. A vicious cycle that leaves countless women murdered and killed annually. Black trans women especially. Are you a Black man? Did this post offend you? How open are you to engaging in uncomfortable conversations that make you look bad and name you as the oppressor? Do you have other Black men to talk to about this? What resources have you read, watched, or listened to lately that have helped you tap into this discomfort? Did anyone call you sexist today? What about a misogynoir? Did I incite Black rage in you? And why? Does addressing violence against Black women make you uncomfortable? Do you blame Black women for violence enacted against them? Can you sit with the idea that you might be an abuser in a Black woman's life? What are you doing to rectify these harms? If this resonates, please pass it along and share it with others. If it doesn't, that's okay too. Like others, I and my words are not meant for everyone. If it is for you, please consider making a donation to my PayPal at thearchives. That's DEARCHIVES. I'm also on Buy Me a Coffee at the same handle, The Archives. Thanks for stopping by. Until next time, in solidarity.